sometimes this reminds me a little bit. So about 25 years ago, when I was relatively new at Indiana, I'd only been there 10 years, I was asked by Dave Lambert, who some of you know, to connect us to this weird system called the ARPANET. And there was lots to figure out, and it was new, and nobody knew what it was, and it was sort of a side project that, you know, might be useful. And, of course, we all know that the ARPANET kind of became the Internet, and we all use it, and it's important and strategic, kind of like Lori talked about. In some ways, this kind of telepresence project reminds me a little bit of that. It's strange and weird and small and sort of a side project and kind of a curiosity. And it might become a big deal. It's hard telling. When I last talked about this almost a year and a half ago at the last all-hands meeting, we were just barely starting. We had a couple NLR offices that were connected to each other over telepresence. We had just sort of established an exchange in the center of the country that they could communicate through. Since then, as you've heard in the discussion yesterday, there's a lot more interest, a lot more connections. We're up to 20-odd sites, almost 30 sites, different universities and institutions in the United States and around the world, and about 72, 75 rooms that are connected. So I'm going to give you kind of an update on what we've done in the last year and a half and kind of where we are and where we're going. Some of the kind of big news is that, just after the last meeting, it became available to everyone. It's growing fairly rapidly, we think, inside of R&E. You can get to lots of other sites. As Wendy mentioned yesterday, there's some international connections. Those are growing fast. We've done lots of international demos. There's a lot of interest. We'll talk a little bit about kind of the international relationship in a later slide. But we've probably done, I don't know, 10, maybe 10 international demos. Australia, China, Singapore, Mexico, every continent except Africa, I suppose. And it's growing there. There's a lot of interest in research and education there, and in communicating with people here in the United States. And one of the really important news items is the partnership with Internet 2. So Internet 2 and NLR, as you know, couldn't agree on anything else, but they have been able to agree that telepresence is something worth doing and worth doing together. So for the first instance of actual exchanging of routes between each other for Internet 2 and NLR, we're doing it for the purposes of telepresence communication. Internet 2 is leaking a few routes to us who are telepresence users so that they can get to the telepresence exchange, so that we can all talk to each other, and so that they can also get to these international partners and the international people can get to them. I think that's pretty significant, and I think that the partnership is great and getting better. We'll talk about Internet 2 a little bit more in a second. So really a very quick review of what telepresence is. As you've heard already, it's intended to be immersive. It's this kind of in-person experience. We talked anecdotally last night with some people who realized that they thought that they had met each other, and then they realized that they'd really only met each other over telepresence, but it seemed like the same thing. It's not, this kind of far-away video conference that we've always had in cluttered rooms and so on. There's a whole lot of thought that's gone into making it seem like you're really sitting at a table or a desk working with someone else who you're conferencing with. But Mike LaHaye from Internet 2 and I have a regular conference, and we got up from our conference and went off the other day and realized that we forgot to hang up the phone because the technology becomes invisible. You don't think about it being there anymore if it's working well, and most of the time it does. So you just sit down in the room and you start working. You don't have to fiddle with the phone and find how to call. Well, sometimes you have to find how to call them, but you don't have to plan on an extra 10 minutes to make your call just to get started. You don't fiddle with the camera. You don't fiddle with the far end stuff. You don't pan it and zoom it and find the controls and all that stuff. It uses, I was going to bring a telephone handset, but it uses this metaphor and and user interface that we're all familiar with using. A telephone call is the way you reach the people at the other end. You sit in a room that is set up and made easy so that even CIOs have been found to use it easily and instinctively. Our CIO, who does really, really great at lots of technical things, but not networking stuff particularly, was able to just sort of walk into one of our rooms for the very first time without any training and sit down and find EDUCAUSE on the phone and punch the button and go off and give his talk to the EDUCAUSE conference without any of us there to help him because he walked in early. And surprised us all, but he said, "Oh, sure, it's easy." And he's been kind of a convert ever since, and it's a similar experience for other people. So we're really pleased with how well it's working. All sorts of stuff that's done, audio, network tuning, integration with enterprise scheduling systems to make it easy to schedule. It's just another resource in your Exchange system if you have that. And if you have all of that integration stuff, you can even push the conference stuff out onto the phone. So you walk into the room and the phone knows that you've got a conference scheduled for right now. And you just say, "Yeah, start the conference," and it goes off and dials the other end. There are single screen systems and kind of big three screen systems that kind of occupy a whole wall. Most of the systems, kind of answering Pete's question from yesterday, most of the systems in the Exchange today are single screen systems. Some of the smaller 37-inch ones and some larger 67-inch ones, 65-inch ones. And so probably 3/4 of them are single screen systems. We're getting more of the 3-screen ones, and some of the international folks have 3-screen ones. And just something to understand is that the architecture of the system is kind of like I think Mike was explaining to last night, it's sort of like a CO, where you have rooms that subscribe to a call manager. The call manager does all the signaling and communicates with an Exchange that handles the calls between systems and sites and even exchanges other kinds of organizations. So if you think about the TelePresence Exchange is kind of like a CO or a kind of master CO that can find everything else. That's what's going on here and why an Exchange is so important. So a TelePresence endpoint consists minimally of a system and a call manager. We're encouraging everyone to have their own call manager so that they can manage their own signaling. And NLR, through the Internet 2 and NLR merger, or not merger, but cooperative agreement for telepresence, is operating what's really an R&E exchange for, so far, the whole world. And of course, it supports point-to-point, multi-point calls. And we also are working to provide connections to commercial providers. And Wendy touched on some of that yesterday. So this is just kind of the pieces, how they all connect to each other. There's an R&E exchange. Ours happens to be in Kansas City, which is kind of in the center of the country. This is a design that Ron talked about for the first time 2 years ago. There's at an end site, there's a call manager minimally and a system, a codec, screen. And you connect through your regional network and you do the signaling and you also do, so there's a signaling path. There's also a data path that goes from the Exchange to the codec. And then you could add other kinds of stuff. You could make it more complicated by adding more redundancy and more systems and all that kind of stuff, but it's fundamentally the same. And then there are a bunch of other little pieces that you can add if you want to. You can throw in firewalls if you want to. Sites can have their own multi-point switches. They can have scheduling stuff. They can have added more security things, some interop modules of different kinds. They can throw in interop for H323 and PSTN and all kinds of other things that can connect their telepresence system relatively seamlessly to other kinds of technologies. I mentioned earlier that the Internet 2 relationship is really important. And I wanted to introduce you to Mike LaHaye, who's my counterpart at Internet 2, and we work, I think, really closely together to kind of make this work and to talk about how we're going to work going forward. And you should, those of you who care a lot about what Internet 2 thinks, Mike has brought a lot of intelligence and experience to this and is a really valuable partner. So one of the things that we're doing is working together both with each other and with Cisco and the commercial providers to try and present a unified front for R&E and to them, which is sort of useful to them but also threatening to them, to try and make it clear to them that we're bringing a whole lot of universities to the picture, but also that they need to deal with us as a unified group. This is a list, I think, up to date, of the systems that are connected today, or the sites that are connected today, and each of these have anywhere from 1 to about a dozen systems that are connected. It's not alphabetical, or just sort of, actually it's sort of more or less historical. It's approximately the order that people came in. Most recent ones are MIT and Baylor and Texas Arlington. Rice, you can see there's a fair amount of interest in Texas. And then the international group I split out and put down at the end. The ones who are connected today are the University of Vienna, it's a business school there. University of Peking, a big management school, kind of like the Harvard of China. National University of Singapore, Zhongshan, which is also known as Sun Yat-sen University down in the south part of China, and several other universities kind of coming. Here's a kind of a graphical representation of the same sort of thing. You can see there's a big bunch of folks on the East Coast, a fair amount of interest in California. Cal State, Fresno, and Berkeley, Scenic represent most of those sites in California. Some Texans, a little bit in the Midwest, particularly in Missouri and Indiana. Wisconsin's got some. Michigan's got a big is starting, and just about everybody who has it is growing. And then there are a lot of other interest in other sites. Kinds of uses. A lot of kind of boardroom stuff, as you'd expect. You've got this kind of intimate conference setting. You want it to be easy, so even CIOs can use it. And that's kind of an ideal setting for a lot of them. But it's not just those. We see business schools, management schools, engineering folks, medical schools. There's a health program going on to bring this in. People have seen operations over telepresence. K through 12 and K through 20 is sort of a surprising area for us because they're just sort of coming up out of the woodwork and trying to contact us and get connected. Lecture halls, museums, other kinds of places. So we talked about the kind of joint R&E exchange a little bit. There are a bunch of commercial providers. Most of the commercial customers connect through one of these commercial providers. The trick is that they're all islands today. It's kind of like really, really early multicast maybe or something like that. If you're familiar with what the technology looked like back then, except back then you could build tunnels between them and have multicast tunneling, and it's kind of ugly. But we're trying to get it so that we can get calls from one place to another. It's kind of developing Dave Jent's questions from yesterday. How do you get from where I am, who I have telepresence, to my friend in Delaware or something like that, or Texas or China who has telepresence, and identifying that they're there and then figuring out how to get to them is still kind of a challenge. But we're trying to solve that to some extent by bringing up connections with the commercial providers on behalf of all of R&E, and then trying to get the R&E institutions, particularly internationally, to start to work together regionally.